Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar where we'll explain the research findings for reaching Australian readers. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the many traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and honour their elders past and present. We respect their enduring connection to land, waterways and culture, and we're privileged to gather on this country to share knowledge, culture and art now and with future generations. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Wenona Byrne. I'm the Director of Writing Australia. Most of us here today love reading. And according to Creative Australia's 2022 National Arts Participation Survey, 69% of Australians read for pleasure. But this number is declining. We need to better communicate the benefits of reading and how we can engage readers to read more. With the busyness of life and competition for our attention, many people have fallen out of the habit of reading. And this decline in reading is worldwide. To address this decline, we need to understand what the barriers to reading are, and different readers have different intentions and barriers depending on their current reading engagement. Writing Australia and Creative Australia have commissioned this research to understand how we can support readers to read more and reduce some of those barriers to reading. Through this research, we've developed practical and effective strategies to support you, the industry and the broader sector, work with readers to meet them where they are in their reading journey. This research was a partnership between Australia Reads and BehavioursWorks. Now, I'd like to hand over to Anna Burkey, CEO of Australia Reads, and Dr. Breanna Wright from BehavioursWorks Australia at Monash University, who will take us through the research. Please type any questions that you have into the Q&A function through the session, and we'll try to get to those at the end. Over to you, Anna and Breanna.
Thank you so much, Wenona. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all, launching this really significant piece of research today. So, hello, we're just going to bring the slides up so that when we get into the meat of things, you'll be able to have a look at some of the key findings, because we know that there is a lot of information. And I wanted to give you a little bit of the context about why and how this research has come to be, so that when we read the findings, we understand that kind of context of how it was commissioned. So we know that reading brings us really incredible benefits. And if we flick over onto our first slide of the session, but we also know that almost a third of us have not read or listened to a book in the last 12 months. And we want to do something not just to stem the tide, but to really turn things around and tackle those falling engagement rates. We want to see more Australians reading more books more often. So that's more individuals engaging in reading. That's more titles being read. And that is an increased frequency of reading. So that's not just once a year. That's people feeling that reading is a regular part of their daily lives. Last year, we launched the report with BehavioursWorks Australia and the backing of Creative Australia. We were able to bring you understanding Australian readers. It took some important step forwards as an industry to start to unpack what's going on in this major reading problem that we're seeing, to be able to understand it better. And we had the heartening news come out of that research that around half of Australians actually want to read more, but they are facing some very particular systemic barriers that are stopping them from engaging with reading. And that's where we looked at the reading journey, that reading isn't just one behavior. It is, in fact, a sequence of behaviors with different stages along the way. And we have to help people who face barriers, whether that's at the point where they're finding a book, whether they're choosing which book they're going to spend their time with next, whether that's the access piece about how they get hold of books, whether that's trying to find that moment to start to read and then to keep finding that moment to continue the books and the reading experience, right the way up to the process of sharing and talking and loving and enjoying discussing books with others around them. And there are different barriers at different stages. There's also different opportunities along the reading journey. And on the next slide, we can see that not everybody has the same barriers and opportunities, and that there are 6 different types of readers. And the work that we're doing in this project with BehavioursWorks and Creative Australia is really looking at age 15 plus. So we're looking at adults and older young people. And those 6 different kinds of readers have all the way from avid readers spanning across to our uninterested non-readers, all have different opportunities and challenges along the way. The things that they're getting in their way, the areas where they might need support, because they're different, we're going to have to need different messages, different programs, different interventions and styles of working with them to be able to support them to overcome those barriers and get reading more often. So on the next slide, you'll see our areas of focus for this new research. We were really looking at those groups that we can have the most impact on. Avid readers, the book sector, we're doing well there. We've got them covered. But our engaged readers need a little more help. And our aspirational, ambivalent, and lapsed readers are actively wanting our support. We just need to talk to them differently. There are so many things that we could do and that we're already doing as a sector. But with our limited resources, where do we focus? Where do we prioritize? What is going to be most likely to work to get us to that goal of more Australians reading more books more often? And with that set up, I will now hand you over to Dr. Breanna Wright, who can talk you through what we have found during the Reaching Australian Readers research project.
Thanks so much, Anna. It's such a pleasure to be here today, and thank you for everybody who's joined us to learn about the research that we'll be sharing. If we could go to the next slide. Now, I have quite a lot of information to get through. It's going to be a little bit of an information dump. I'm going to try and explain things as clearly as possible, but there is quite a lot to go through that's in the report. Thanks so much for the setup, Anna, which covered everything that we learned from the Understanding Australian Readers report last year. I'm going to shift now to what we've done this time. The purpose of this current research that's launched today was to really use everything that we learnt last year in the Understanding Australian Readers report and take it a step further to understand, now that we know more about the barriers to recreational reading, what kind of behavioural strategies could be most effective to increase recreational reading intentions and ultimately change people's reading behaviours. In order to do that effectively, a key aim was to understand mechanisms of change. And this is where we identify kind of the how and the why that a particular strategy might be working through, so that can underpin future industry-backed strategies and campaigns. So we weren't just focused on, like, with these couple of examples, which strategy might work. We really wanted to understand why it was working as well, so that we could use that insight. If we can go to the next slide. So to do this, we had 5 phases of research within the project. To start with, we developed up a range of possible strategies that could be tested. We couldn't do all of them, so we had to prioritise which strategies we were able to test within this study. Following that, we refined the strategies that had been prioritised, though it's very important to note everything was still draft materials, so none of this leads to kind of like a final campaign material, still very much in the testing ideas phase. We then conducted an online experiment to test which of those strategies was effective and how it was effective. And at the end, we also held a focus group with the priority audience segments to get a little bit more kind of rich data and qualitative insights into how they felt about the strategies, how they were responding to them, and some possible kind of suggestions for improvement to inform those next steps. Slide. So how did we generate what to test? Well, we first went back to the Understanding Australian Readers report. We went through all of the information and the data that we had collected then, and we drew upon the barriers and the drivers across the reading journey and across the different segments and pulled out all the strategy ideas that we had suggested within that report for consideration. Australia Reads also very kindly helped canvass ideas from industry. So to capture all of the expertise and knowledge that's currently sitting within industry, and to also capture things that are currently being done or that have a lot of potential. So we collated all of these possible ideas into a long list of possible strategies, and we mapped those against which ones we thought would be relevant for the different audience segments, as well as where they were relevant along the reading journey. So which stage of that journey were they targeting, and which barrier to reading were they trying to address? So we have in the report, in the appendix, you can see the full table of all the ideas and what they were trying to achieve. Now, as I said, we couldn't unfortunately test all 36 strategies that were identified. We only had room for 8 within the confines of this project to test. So we had to prioritise which ones we thought kind of made the cut. To do that, we held both a prioritisation survey and a workshop with 13 industry representatives. And they helped us think about, we explicitly considered 3 criteria: impact in terms of the extent that we thought a particular strategy would change the behaviour that it was targeting; magnitude of reach, so this is how big would the audience pool be for that particular strategy. Would it be a very narrow group of people that we might be targeting with that strategy, or was it quite a large group of people? And lastly, feasibility, which is the fun topic of resource constraints, and what could we, if this worked, could it practically be implemented in the world in some way? So that led to 8 strategies that covered different stages of the reading journey, different barriers, and were designed for, or were relevant for, different audience segments as well. Slide, please. Apologies. So this led to our top 8 strategies. I'm going to describe them very briefly. There is more detail in the report. Strategy 1 was underpinned by the idea that finding books can be quick and easy. It talked about how there are library apps that can help you navigate different genres and help you find books that are going to be of interest to you. Strategy 2 was the idea that book recommendations can come from anywhere. So you might get book recommendations from librarians, from booksellers, but also from friends and other people in your life that maybe have shared interests. And there's kind of a world of recommendations sitting out there that you can connect with and start to learn about. Strategy 3 was the idea of a government-supported book voucher, where you would receive a voucher, and that would enable you to go and purchase at least one book. Strategy 4 was the idea that there is a book for all moods. So this kind of told the story of somebody that was wanting to read but wasn't particularly engaged with the material that they usually read. And so they decide to pick up a different kind of book. They go and pick up a graphic novel, and that's what kind of hits the spot for them at that moment. Strategy 5 is that there are ways to find time for books. And this was the idea that whilst people can have quite busy lives and feel like a lot of time pressure, sometimes we can find ways to multitask. And it told the story of somebody who started to listen to audiobooks during their commute to work, which enabled them to read more, but also made their commute more enjoyable. Strategy 6 was about setting intentions to read. So this is underpinned by the idea of what we call implementation intentions, where we explicitly think about our calendars or our lives and find times where we can do the behaviour that we want to do. And somebody realises that they actually have some pockets of time during their lunch break, during their commute, after work, where they're able to carve out that time to read more. Strategy 7 was about rediscovering the comfort of reading. Now, in that first report, we found that across all the segments, comfort was one of the most common emotions that people associated with reading. And so this was underpinned by that finding and told the story of somebody who had been doom scrolling at bedtime and was making them feel a bit anxious. And they were able to rediscover the feeling of comfort that they got from reading at bedtime. And our last strategy, Read Your Way, was again about there's kind of no wrong way to read, and the right to read is the one that you feel like reading. So it told the story of somebody who was trying to read a book that they felt they should read, and then they see somebody else who's reading purely for pleasure and enjoyment, and they decide to read something that they feel like reading instead of what they think they should read. So I understand that's a very quick overview, but just to give you an idea of they're the ideas and the strategies that we tested within this study. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm now going to quickly go through the findings. They're quite detailed, so I'll do my best to explain them simply during this webinar, but happy to have any follow-up conversations if there's more that you would like to understand. Next slide. So one of the key takeaways is that there's no universal strategy that's going to be most effective for everybody. So a more targeted and specific approach that is relevant for different groups will probably be the most effective way to try and change people's behaviour, rather than a universal message that is sent out to the kind of whole population. And this is largely because, as I'll explain in a minute, the key mechanisms of change are about things that feel most relevant for people, what's relatable for different groups, and also the things that are motivating for people vary substantially across different types of readers and different parts of that reading journey that we want to see behaviour change across. Next slide. So this is a really key slide. What we found is there's kind of 5 key ingredients that made strategies effective. So they're listed there. The first one is capturing attention. Now that one's not going to be a surprise. People have to kind of be engaged and pay attention to any of these strategies in order for it to then influence them. But we also found that it has to feel relevant to that person. So the more a strategy felt relevant to somebody, and the more that it prompted reflection about how reading fits into their life. And we also had the last 2 factors were it made them feel confident about finding and reading books, and it made reading feel achievable. So these were the 5 kind of key mechanisms through which the strategies worked. Now, again, this may feel like it's not surprising or that it may feel obvious, but I want to outline that these 5 came from a much longer list of other mechanisms that could have worked and could have played a role in why strategies were effective. But they were things like the emotional response that people had to the strategies, the clarity of the message and the way that it was delivered, and also things like motivation and opportunity. Now, those things were less significant, and what we found was that these 5 ingredients were the main way in which we were creating change in people's reading intentions. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through that in a little bit more detail now to explain it. So essentially, the more that a strategy made somebody consider how reading fits into their life, captured their attention, and felt relevant to someone like them, the more effective it was. And the really kind of, I guess, key part I want to drive home is this is working through prompting kind of cognitive reflection for that person, especially when they're thinking about how this could work for me. So any strategy that makes somebody reflect on oh, I've seen this example, and that made me think about how I might be able to fit reading into my life, or how I might want to go and find a book to read. That reflection that's happening is a really critical step to them shaping an intention to then go and do that behaviour. And it works both for intentions to find and get books, and to find time to read books and start to read. So the strategies that achieved both relevance to the person, feeling like it was for them and it was about how it could help them, along with practical resonance, are the strategies that had the largest impact overall. Next slide. So which strategies did that? There were two strategies that worked the most in terms of what we've collectively called message impact within the report. So it was strategy 6, which was about setting intentions to read, explicitly finding time within your life to read. And strategy 7, which was rediscovering the comfort of reading. Now, there was another strategy, strategy 3. This was also effective, but it was less effective than strategy 6 and 7. So strategy 6 and 7 are more likely to change behavioural intentions and would create stronger intentions. However, strategy 3 was also effective. Next slide, please. So that was message impact, about the relevance, reflection, and attention. The second mechanism through which the strategies worked were the capability factors. So this was the extent to which strategies made people feel confident to read and made reading feel achievable in their lives. So this is the really practical kind of elements around, I feel like I know how to go and find books that I want to read. I kind of know how to navigate that very overwhelming and confusing at times arena of all the book choices that are out there. As well as, I feel confident in being able to read in a way that works for my life. And so strategies that increased how confident people felt, how easy they thought it would be to start doing those behaviours, and the practical knowledge that they had around how to do those behaviours. I think those of us who love to read often forget, or, there's a lot of assumed knowledge and skill besides literacy skills themselves that really influence people's ability to engage with recreational reading. And we also found that in the report last year that, knowing how to navigate a library, knowing what kind of genres you like, or if you like fast-paced or slow-paced, knowing what kind of emotion you want a book to evoke in you, all of these things become second nature to avid readers. But they're far more unfamiliar for our other audience segments, so especially our ambivalent, aspirational, and lapsed readers. These are things that we might assume that they know how to do, but they don't. And so strategies that help them feel confident to be able to engage in those behaviours are really effective. So this includes things like showing that it's easy to find books that match your interests, modelling simple book-finding habits, and providing practical tips about how reading can fit into somebody's life when there are other pressures that they're navigating as well. Next slide, please. So which strategies worked through this capability mechanism? There were two strategies that were the most effective. This was strategy 1, finding books can be quick and easy, and strategy 5, there are ways to find time for books. So these strategies were the most effective, and from a research perspective, that's quite logical. They were both very practical messages around, here is a tool that you can use to help you find books that you want to read. And also strategy 5, there are simple, easy ways that you can incorporate reading into your life. That doesn't have to be difficult, feels very achievable. The other two strategies that were effective still, but less so than those first two strategies, were strategy 4, there's a book for all moods, and strategy 8, read your way. And I think that's because these two strategies, number 4 and number 8, still position reading as a very achievable activity that people can do in the way that works for them, but they were a little less, explicit in exactly how to do that. So it was more about reframing reading rather than giving people that really clear, practical how-to guide about, how to do this part of the reading journey, for example. Next slide, please. And so that brings us to, just to kind of reiterate that point, different strategies work best for different parts of the reading journey. Now, this is not surprising because finding, the behaviour of finding books that you want to read and getting those books is very different to finding the time to read and the motivation to actually sit down and, well, not necessarily sit down, but to actually crack open the book and start. So we had 2 groups of behavioural intentions that we looked at here. So in the survey itself, there were about 12 or 14 individual behavioural intentions that we looked at. In order to make sense of all of that data, we looked at how those behavioural intentions grouped together. And that gave us 2 really clear groups, which we've called discovery intentions. And these are the intentions that relate to the earlier stages within the reading journey, essentially finding, choosing, and getting books. And planning intentions, which were the latter half of the reading journey and really focused on behaviours related to starting and continuing to read. So the strategy that was most effective to change discovery intentions, finding and getting books, was strategy 2. And this was the one that talked about, book recommendations can really come from anywhere. You can talk to your bookseller, you can talk to your friends, you can talk to your librarian, and there's lots of stuff out there for you to discover. And for planning intentions, we had 2 strategies that were most effective. Strategy 6, setting intentions to read, and strategy 7, rediscovering the comfort of reading. Now, strategy 6, setting intentions, I think it's really clear why that was effective. It was very much about explicitly finding pockets of time in your life that you can kind of clear out for reading, essentially. And the rediscovering comfort of reading, the narrative around that was really, what you're doing at bedtime, and I guess replacing kind of doom scrolling with the comfort that you can get from a book. So again, whilst the underlying message was kind of about comfort and emotion, it also had quite a clear time example about when you could find time to read. Next slide, please. So, sorry. Another key finding from the report is that it's really important to meet people where they are. Now, this will look quite different for where people are, obviously, but one of the key findings was that at the very start of the survey, we asked people if they were planning to either find books to read or to read a book in the next 3 months. And we called these baseline intentions. So this was before we exposed them to any of the strategy materials. Now, people who said yes, they had some intention to either find or read books in the next 3 months, had a far stronger response to all of the strategies than people who had very low baseline intentions. So what this means is that people, bring a lot with them when they're engaging with persuasive messaging in the world. And we can use that, I guess, to leverage the effectiveness of these strategies. And there's a really kind of nice example I want to share with you, which I think is a really encouraging finding from the report. Our lapsed readers who, as a reminder, haven't read a book in the past 12 months or longer, if they told us at the start of the survey that they would like to either find a book or start to read a book in the next 3 months. So even though they hadn't read, if they were like, oh, I think I would like to start again soon, if it had been brewing in their mind in some way, they moved more positively after seeing the strategies than any other group that we surveyed. And so one, that speaks to, I guess, the room for impact, particularly with lapsed readers, but also the importance of timing with when we reach out to people or when we try to support them to re-enter in reading. And there might be some messaging around how we form those baseline intentions, although that requires some more research to support it. So it's a really encouraging finding that if people are just thinking about reading more, then they respond far more positively to these persuasive message strategies. And just one more example, because we can overlay this with some of the insights from the Understanding Readers report. In that report, we found that there were some segments who read quite infrequently. So our aspirational readers read the least frequently of those current reader segments. And they were more likely to read kind of during certain occasions. So they were more likely to read when they were going on holiday, for example. So if they're coming up to a holiday period, they're possibly going to be thinking, oh, I might want to get a book to take away with me, or I might read during my time off from work. If we expose people to these strategies when they're already starting to think about books in some way, then the impact of that strategy is going to be greater than if we were to expose them to that message at a different time. So that's what we mean by kind of meeting people where they are. Next slide, please. So just to start to kind of pull all of this together, people responded best when the messages in the strategies were really clear, and they provided concrete steps about what people could do practically to incorporate reading into their life. Strategies that were reduced friction and made reading easy and accessible were also very effective. So this could be things like curated recommendations that align with people's interests. So again, if we go back to the Understanding Australian Readers findings, a lot of our ambivalent and aspirational readers struggle to find books that match their interests. Many of them only find books that they want to read a couple of times a year. And so if we can increase the number of books that they want to read, that increases the amount of books that they can read. Also, introducing people to simple tools that can help intentionally integrate reading into their daily lives. So finding ways to support them to figure out when reading works for them. And during the focus groups, there were really interesting discussions, especially about the rediscovering the comfort associated with reading. People said, I love this strategy, but I don't like to read before bed. I'm too tired. I just fall asleep. Those types of reasons. And so helping them identify when they do like to read, like when is reading enjoyable for you? It might not be at bedtime. It might be first thing in the morning. It might be on your commute. Will help people imagine how they can incorporate reading into their life and therefore form those intentions to do so. However, it's very important to note that what is easy will vary significantly across these audience segments. So things that are easy for avid readers and even for our engaged readers who have very high capability when it comes to the reading journey behaviours will not be easy for some of our other segments. And as I mentioned, our ambivalent and aspirational readers struggle to find books that they want to read. So they don't have the same skills in navigating book browsing and discovering titles that are going to interest them, or even knowing what they're interested in. So we need to use all of those insights from the first report to understand how to make things feel relatable and easy for each segment. Next slide, please. So I'm going to, because I'm sure there's interest in kind of what might resonate across those different priority audience segments. We've pulled together predominantly the qualitative insights we had both from the survey and from the focus group to summarise what we heard from them about what resonates and how we might be able to do that targeted messaging. So for lapsed readers, this really revolved around using storytelling that reconnects them emotionally with the past enjoyment that they have of reading. So our lapsed readers, although they haven't read in the past year or more, have really fond memories of reading. They remember it as a very enjoyable leisure activity. And so connecting them to the pleasure that they have experienced before is a really useful prompt. Also providing really clear, structured re-entry pathways. So making it feel easy and accessible, and most importantly, not intimidating. That there are really easy ways that you can get into books, whether that be short reads, audiobooks, guided recommendations, and really reinforcing that message that all books are good books. And importantly, in terms of tone, keeping messaging really warm, non-judgmental and achievable, even breaking things down into smaller steps for them so that there's really clear kind of how-tos. For our aspirational readers, emphasising confidence-building tips was quite important, and especially that messaging around, this counts as reading. So reframing audiobooks as this counts, graphic novels, short stories as this counts as reading, even, really easy reads that maybe don't represent books they feel that they should be reading. It all counts as reading. It's all good for you. Ways to do this might be through providing curated lists and low-effort discovery tools. And importantly for this group, similar to lapsed readers, removing any ambiguity around next steps. Like they really need quite practical how-tos, like how do I navigate a library? How do I use this particular book matching app to find what I like? So really breaking things down quite simply for them. Next slide, please. For our engaged readers, focusing on strategies that streamline choice and reduce overwhelm. So this group is quite skilled and competent. They have quite high capability when it comes especially to navigating book browsing and book discovery. But because they struggle with competing demands on their time, competing priorities when it comes to what they do in their leisure time, making it as easy as possible for them to engage in those behaviours and reducing any feelings of being overwhelmed when it comes to choice can just remove the friction from that behaviour for them. They also responded really well to using relatable modelling from peers who reflect their lifestyle. Because they're a little bit of an in-between, they're not quite avid readers, but they love reading and they want to do more of it. Having role modelling about what they can look like and how they might be able to prioritise some more reading in their life resonated very strongly with them. For our ambivalent readers, showcasing clear, simple ways to get low-cost books or free books was a really enabling factor for them. So this might be libraries, book swaps, vouchers, etc. And again, using relatable modelling from peers, they didn't respond well to anything that felt like an idealized character or too aspirational. They wanted things that are really relatable to where they are and what reading might realistically look like for them, because they're probably not going to jump straight to being an avid reader. They and also showing diverse reading formats, so ebooks, audiobooks, as well as just different types of books in terms of genres, etc. And easy step-to-step ways to engage and to incorporate reading into their life practically. Next slide. And lastly, we had some avid readers in the survey because we couldn't effectively screen them all out. So these are just 2 observations from the survey qualitative data that we've included for our avid readers. Avoid over-explaining the basics and frame strategies as kind of inspiration rather than instruction. Now, you may notice that the notes for avid readers are dramatically different from our other segments. And I think, that quite clearly they're so competent, they have no barriers when it comes to reading. They're very confident, they're very motivated. And so messaging that will resonate with them is quite starkly different from what we've seen is resonating with those other 4 priority segments. Next slide, please. So we also, largely from that qualitative feedback again, have drawn together some messaging principles. So these are things that we heard a lot from the focus group and from the open text questions that were in the survey about what people felt worked, what they'd like to see, what resonates with them. And so these are starting with positive experiences or emotions. When examples started with a bit like, oh, I haven't read for ages, I want to, but it's so hard. People didn't really like that. It didn't resonate with them. Starting with the barrier of why it's hard didn't seem to work. Starting with a much more positive experience and the positive emotions that they can gain from reading is what struck people much more. Ensuring practical clarity and actionability. So people want really clear advice. In the case I haven't hammered that home enough, really clear practical steps. Lead with everyday relevance to strengthen the authenticity and realism. Again, this varies across the segments, but they want to be able to relate to the people that they're seeing or hearing about. And similar to that, using relatable social modelling with a lot of visible diversity, both of people and different book types and book formats. Focusing on low effort options for readers, again, making it as easy for them as possible to take those first steps, and also making the desired behaviour explicit, simple, and immediately doable. This is quite an important one in terms of people responded quite well when it was really clear what the message was asking them to do, and they felt that they could start taking first steps towards that. Next slide, please. So to summarize all of that, and I know that that's quite a lot of information to absorb in a short amount of time, just to focus on the key takeaways. Making reading feel relevant to different types of readers and to how reading works in their everyday life. Increase people's confidence around reading and making reading feel like it's achievable for them, especially within busy routines or different lifestyles, and offering practical, low-effort ways to reconnect with books. Because again, a lot of these people want to be reconnecting with books. They want to read more. They just need some more practical support about how to do that and how to make it work for them. Next slide, which I think is going to kick us into the discussion. So I've just kind of info dumped a lot of data from the report, and hopefully you'll all have time to read through the report and absorb that at a more leisurely pace. But now we're going to reflect on kind of what this might mean and how the industry may want to respond and use these findings that we've reported in Reaching Australian Readers. So I will hand over to Wenona to kick us off.
Thanks so much, Breanna. That was a fantastic presentation. I know that there are questions coming through in the Q&A chat, and that's fantastic. Keep them coming. But just to kick us off, I have a question, which is, how can the sector use this new research?
Thanks, Wenona. I think we're just excited to have so much research coming in. I think that there are so many questions about what research is out there coming through in the chat thread, because we've had a bit of a dearth of research for many years. And it's really wonderful to have both the Understanding Australian Readers report and this companion piece, the Reaching Australian Readers, that work together so well to give us such a broad picture. I will just say for those who are asking as well, we have a really broad definition of reading. So when you hear us use that word reading, we're really talking about long form reading, everything that includes poetry, plays, graphic novels, fiction, nonfiction, things that require you to stop and concentrate. So that's our kind of broader definition that we use. And that this research is something that we can use individually, that we can use within our own libraries, schools, publishing houses, bookshops, to really think about which audiences are we trying to target. And if you're interested in more of the demographic information about each of those segments, that's where the first report, Understanding Australian Readers, has a wealth of really rich material and tables where you can go and look at the barriers and pick barriers that you might want to trial yourself to overcome. And then this new research really gives us a steer on the things to focus on the most, which I think is what's most exciting, Wenona, is that we want to do so much. Where do we start? And having those kind of key findings of make sure we're positive and make sure we're building people's confidence and capability, be really open about what it is to be a reader. Some of these things might sound obvious to those of us who are avid readers, and just getting that clarion call from the testing to say we need to change how we're talking to some of these people to make it easier is really useful to have that kind of research backup. So I think we'll be able to use this and the earlier report together to think about what we do individually, but then at some point in this conversation, I'm really keen for us to talk about next steps, where we go next collectively.
Great, thanks, Anna. So the research has helped us test some assumptions about what might be effective. Did you find anything that was particularly surprising in the findings?
I'm sure that Breanna found plenty of things along the way. I think for me, I was expecting Breanna referenced the emotions, and emotions are really important. We want to trigger emotions. We want people to have a wonderful experience with reading. But I expected tugging on the heartstrings, really kind of leaning into kind of emotional marketing and messaging might have tested higher than the practical stuff. The real stuff about building capability to make it, how do I go and get that book, and make the kind of how-to steps really incredibly clear for the different groups and in a supportive way rather than an instructional kind of telling off kind of way. So I think that was really surprising to me, that sense of we need to build confidence, we need to open up the idea of what it is to be a reader, and that we need to be really practical about what we're asking people to do and how to do it, were the things that came up tested much more strongly than I was expecting.
And I might just jump in there quickly with an observation as well, if I can, because what Anna said there about helping people feel like they're readers, I think there's an important finding from the Understanding Australian Readers report that I'd like to share. Is in that report, we found that people often self-identify more as readers than their behaviours would indicate. So clear example, lapsed readers haven't read a book in at least a year, but over 60% of lapsed readers identify themselves as a casual reader or an infrequent reader. And so people actually do feel like readers. We just kind of have to help them feel like their way of reading is okay.
Thanks, Breanna.
And why we're doing this is a question that's come through, and it's a really good kind of basics question about why we want to explore reading. And that's definitely some of the work that Australia Reads has been doing that has led us up to this point. This is kind of us we're 3 steps down the rabbit hole now in unpacking the problem and what the solutions might be. But you can find material on the Australia Reads website about the benefits of reading, whether that is how it supports us psychologically, how it supports our physical health. It actually calms us down, lowers our blood pressure, reduces stress quite significantly, and provides really important bonding moments for families. It's also, you are a more empathetic and tolerant person. And we might think that if you are a reader, that is the case, but we have studies that prove that's the case. So having this, a country and communities of readers building reading culture is really about having these outcomes for our community that can have stronger communities that have better success rates in life. So that's a kind of core fundamental proposition and a great question. We've also had a question about the fact that we're looking in this research at 15 plus, and we have been for a little while now. We always get lots of questions from the school sector and those who work with younger children about the interaction with young people. And I think there's separate research on the way about that. Is there not, Breanna? Is there not, Wenona?
Yes, I can just quickly comment on that. So Creative Australia is now partnering with Wallace Research to look at children's engagement with arts and creativity, of which reading is a very important element. That's for ages 2 to 15. So that will be one of the first studies, I believe, in the country that is working with children from that age group, and that will be released mid-year.
So that's very exciting. And yes, look out for that. There's more coming. It's lovely to see momentum about this much on the reading research. Breanna, we've had questions as well about reading to children and kind of what this does for parents. That's really a separate research question and an opportunity for any researchers listening, isn't it?
Yes, it's a question that we would love to explore more, but because it is a very separate behaviour and behavioural environment when you're reading to children, with children, there's a whole bunch of other kind of interactions and negotiation that might happen in that space. So it's a very separate process than when somebody is choosing to read for pleasure just for themselves. And so we are very keen to investigate more about what it looks like, especially from a behavioural perspective, when you're reading to somebody else. We don't currently have any research into that, unfortunately.
We do, however, have research into, there's lots of questions and insights about, okay, how do we implement now? So we've got these fantastic insights, and we can think about how we can implement them on an individual basis, but what could we be doing together? What are things that we can scale, and who is influential? So we've been talking about these strategies that we've been testing, but who we hear from, who we get messages from is incredibly important, isn't it, Breanna? Like who the messenger is isn't always who we might think it is that might be the most influential on us.
Yes, that's right. And the key thing that behavioural science has gathered from a lot of different research is that people who look and feel like me are some of the strongest influences from a social perspective. And so what this means is that hearing kind of from our peers who very much feel like us, who we feel like face similar barriers, their lives feel similar to us, that resonates much more strongly, and especially in the context of these findings, having relatable role modeling, that really means like I want people who I feel are real, who are clearly facing the same barriers as me. Like social media influencers who are very aspirational don't resonate in the same way. People who are able to read, hundreds of books a year, as some influencers do, that's not achievable for these audience segments. They're not going to be able to take somebody else's lifestyle like that and learn how they could do this themselves. So people like the peers are probably some of the most important role modelling.
And lots of thoughts coming up as well about, well, what's the cause? What are the problems? And we've delved into them in quite a bit of detail in the Understanding Australian Readers section of the research project last year. But in terms of our recommendations, it is in fact not to focus on the problem, but to focus on the behaviour that we want to see. So really focusing on the positive and supportive messaging as being one of the most critical things we can really do, Breanna.
Yes, that's right. And whilst each of the strategies we developed kind of started with a barrier, they were all trying to address a barrier that we had found in the Understanding Australian Readers report, whether that be finding books isn't a priority for me, finding books is difficult, books are expensive, I'm not in the mood to read. These were the barriers that we started with. What we found in actually testing different strategies is that focusing on the barrier isn't motivating. It doesn't resonate. People really want to focus on the positive and what they can achieve. And I think this comes down to, again, that finding that half of Australians want to read more. So they already think that reading is good. They already know that they enjoy it. They want to be doing more of it. So they don't actually need to be told that you can overcome this, or you'll enjoy this. They just need to know how. They just need that practical support.
And so it's one thing to talk about this kind of in theory, but I know everybody's incredibly keen to know, but what has worked? Like, how has that been translated into practice on the floor, in my library, in my school, in my shop? What does that look like? And we often share examples at Australia Reads, but we're looking for more case studies. So if there are things that align with this research that you have either been doing before now or are going to try out as a result of these findings, please send them into Australia Reads. You can email hello@australiareads.org.au, because we collect those and share those back. And as the national not-for-profit focused purely on reading, that is something we're keen to do, is to share that knowledge and that information. So keep that coming to us. Now, there's been some questions about what next, Wenona, particularly about how, for example, the work of Writing Australia and how we work together, both across the sector, but with Australia Reads. And so what's next? Where do we go next now that we have this research?
Well, this will be really helpful in devising new strategies that Writing Australia can support in the future. And that's why we wanted to do further research and build on the Understanding Australian Readers, so that we could really ensure that any reading campaign or any work that we're doing in the sector is grounded in research and is more likely to be effective. So I think this is also really helpful. If I can do a shout out for the new National Cultural Policy submissions that have just opened yesterday and will close on the 24th of May. This is an incredible opportunity to speak directly to government about why reading is important to your part of the community, what you think needs to be invested in and supported more in your work that you do, whether it's a national reading campaign, whether it's more Australian books in schools, or more support for libraries. These sorts of things are definitely should form part of submissions, and we encourage everyone. It doesn't have to be onerous, it can be short, to write a submission, because it really makes a difference.
And Australia Reads will have some materials to help you that you can draw from, that we'll be releasing in the next couple of weeks, that has used not just this research, but other research into reading to look at what are our key policy recommendations that we can all be asking for and championing as a sector. That includes funding targeted national reading campaigns that we want to see we're all willing to pull together. Can government support us to do that at scale? It includes equipping schools and libraries with the trained staff and collections that they need. It includes ensuring access for everyone, for all Australians, and it includes, while we believe all reading is good reading, we also want to promote Australian stories. So that's a policy platform that we'll be sharing in the weeks to come that you can draw from for those submissions, which I'd encourage you to make. But somehow an hour has elapsed. I hope that there are many happy hours of reading in the report ahead of you. You've often been looking for examples in more detail. There's more detail in this report and last year's report. And please do let us know any case studies that you would like to share. But I'm going to hand back to Wenona to wrap us up.
Look, thanks everyone. I really hope that you found it interesting and useful. If you have, we'll be having a lot more conversations about this research, but if you have specific questions, you may email Breanna. She's got her email address up there on the screen to find out more. Encourage you just to look through the research and contact us if you need more information. We might still have a few questions we didn't get through, and we'll try and address those if you can email us or follow up. We'll follow up with you. For those who missed the beginning or missed a part of it or want to share this webinar, we will have a recording, and everyone who registered will receive a link to the recording. So I think that's it. It's time to wrap up now. Thank you so much to everyone who attended. Thank you, Anna and Breanna, for presenting that research in such an engaging way. Really appreciate all the work that's gone into it and hope it can be helpful to everyone out there.